You were taught that hard work creates wealth. But if that were true, millions of exhausted people would already be rich. They are not, because money does not follow effort. It follows mindset, decisions, patterns most people never question. You are not someone who needs to be told to try harder. You already try harder than almost anyone you know. You have read the books, taken the courses, set the alarms, built the spreadsheets, tracked the habits. You know about compound interest. You know the importance of networking. You know about deep work. You know how successful people spend their mornings. You have done the work. And yet, here you are, still frustrated, still wondering, still stuck. This is not a book about working harder. This is a book about why working harder is the wrong prescription for what you actually have. Because what you have is not a discipline problem. It is not a knowledge problem. It is not even a strategy problem, though you have probably blamed your strategy more times than you can count. What you have is a wiring problem, deep inside the operating system that runs your decisions, your ambitions, and your relationship with money. There are programs still running. Programs installed before you were old enough to understand what belief even was. Some were handed down by your parents. Some came from a single moment, in a grocery store, when you were 7 years old. Some were written by a culture with very specific ideas about who deserves wealth and who does not. These programs are invisible. They do not announce themselves. They operate quietly, beneath your conscious intentions, and they steer you away from the very outcomes you say you want. Neuroscientists call it the predictive brain. Behavioral economists call it cognitive bias. Therapists who specialize in money call it your financial blueprint. Whatever name you choose, the effect is the same. You move toward a goal, you get close, and something invisible, automatic, and completely familiar pulls you back. You undercharge for your work. You delay the email that could change everything. You create conflict in a relationship that was going well. You spend money you meant to invest. You do not know why. It just happened. This audiobook was built to show you exactly how that works. Not with affirmations, not with empty motivation that fades by Wednesday, but with real mechanisms. The science of how beliefs form, how they operate without your permission, and how they can be dismantled systematically and replaced with something that actually serves you. Before we go further, I want to address something directly. There is a real chance you open this with skepticism. Maybe you think this is just another positive thinking book, wrapped in scientific language. Maybe you have tried mindset work before and found it vague, unmeasurable, and disappointing. Maybe your objection is the most honest one of all. Your problem is not your thoughts. Your problem is your bank account, and the distance between those two things feels enormous. Those objections are intelligent, and this book takes them seriously. What you will find here is not an invitation to visualize abundance and wait for the universe to respond. What you will find is a specific set of mechanisms drawn from neuroscience, behavioral economics, and clinical psychology. Mechanisms that explain precisely how your beliefs are shaping your financial reality, and a structured 30-day process for changing them. Not changing how you feel, changing how you operate. There are 10 chapters ahead. Each one names something real. Each one ends with a technique you can use today. By the time you reach the end, you will not just feel inspired. You will understand yourself in a way most people never do. And that understanding, not motivation, not hustle, is the thing that changes everything. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Effort Trap. You have probably had this thought before. Maybe not in these exact words, but somewhere close to this. I am doing everything right. I am showing up. I am putting in the hours. So why does it feel like I am running on a treadmill? That question is smarter than it sounds. Because a treadmill is precisely the right metaphor for what is happening. A treadmill is a machine specifically designed to produce the experience of motion without actual displacement. You sweat. Your legs move. Your heart rate rises. Your fitness tracker confirms that you are working. And when you step off, you are in exactly the same place you started. This is what economists call the effort trap. And it is one of the most seductive traps in modern professional life because it feels virtuous. In a culture that has elevated hustle to a moral category, exhaustion has become a proxy for value. If you are tired, you must be doing something right. If you are busy, you must be important. If you are overwhelmed, at least you are trying. The trap does not feel like a trap. It feels like integrity, like the right kind of suffering, like the price of eventual success. But here is what the research actually shows. Studies on productivity and cognitive performance consistently find that increased effort beyond a certain threshold not only fails to produce better outcomes, it actively produces worse ones. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for creative thinking, strategic planning, and sound financial judgment, operates measurably less efficiently under sustained cognitive load. You become worse at the very things you are working so hard to do. Your judgment degrades. Your creativity narrows. Your ability to see the larger picture of your situation diminishes, and you find yourself making small, reactive decisions rather than large, strategic ones. This is not an argument for laziness. It is an argument for accuracy. The question is never how hard you are working. The question is whether the work you are doing is connected to the actual bottleneck in your system. And for most high-effort, low-result people, the bottleneck is not on the surface where the work happens. It is underground, in the belief architecture that determines which tasks you pursue, how you price yourself, whether you follow through on opportunities, and how much financial success your nervous system will allow before it starts generating reasons to step back. Consider Sarah. She is 34, works in marketing at a consulting firm, and has been trying to launch a side consulting practice for 3 years. She is genuinely smart. She is talented at what she does. Her existing clients love her, refer her constantly, and tell her regularly that she should be charging more. But every time her practice starts to gain real momentum, something happens. A project falls apart due to a scope misunderstanding that somehow keeps occurring. She underprices herself so dramatically that even successful projects leave her exhausted and underpaid. She takes on a difficult client who consumes twice the energy of her other clients combined. She gets sick at the moment she most needs to be operating at full capacity. She finds herself rebuilding her website from scratch rather than doing the selling that would make the website matter. From the outside, these look like bad luck or poor individual decisions. From Sarah's inside perspective, she mostly just thinks she needs to work harder, plan better, be more disciplined next time. What neither vantage point can see is that these disruptions are not random events. They are patterned, and patterns in human behavior are never accidental. They are always pointing at something. The pattern is a defense mechanism. Sarah grew up in a household where financial success was spoken about as something other people had. Luckier people, less principled people, people who had compromised something essential. Where ambition was quietly equated with arrogance or selfishness. Where the phrase, "Who do you think you are?" was deployed often enough to leave a deep mark on what felt permissible. Her nervous system learned, early and completely, that visible success was not safe. And now, every time she approaches the edge of genuine professional breakthrough, her nervous system does precisely the job it was designed to do. It protects her from the danger it was trained to detect by generating the circumstances that prevent her from reaching it. She is not broken. Her software is outdated. The first principle of cognitive rewiring is this: behavior that looks irrational from the outside is almost always perfectly rational from the inside, once you understand the belief system operating underneath it. Your self-sabotage is not weakness. It is your oldest, most loyal protection system doing exactly what it was designed to do in exactly the conditions it was built for. The problem is not that the system is malfunctioning. The problem is that it was calibrated for a reality that no longer exists by a child who did not have the capacity to evaluate what she was learning. This is why willpower fails. Not because you lack it, because willpower, by design, cannot override a subconscious program. Willpower lives in the conscious mind. The programs live somewhere older, faster, and far more powerful than conscious thought. Willpower can suppress a program temporarily, can white-knuckle past it for a sprint, can override it long enough to build a habit if the conditions are right. But the program keeps running underneath all of that. And eventually, always, it reasserts itself. The diet fails. The savings account empties. The opportunity does not get followed up on. The relationship recreates the familiar dynamic. Not because you are weak, because you are human, and your brain is doing exactly what human brains do. The irony of the effort trap runs even deeper when you consider what it costs beyond money. Think about the relationships that get crowded out by constant work, the physical health that deteriorates because rest feels irresponsible, the creative capacity that atrophies because genuine play and unstructured thinking have been reclassified as waste. The compounding cost of the effort trap is not only financial, it is a narrowing of the entire life. And the narrowing accelerates over time, because as the returns on effort diminish, the natural response is to apply more effort, which produces more diminishing returns, which produces more effort, and the circle tightens. There is a term used in organizational psychology called defensive routines, first described by the theorist Chris Argyris. A defensive routine is a habitual pattern of behavior that protects a person or organization from experiencing the discomfort of examining the assumptions that are producing their poor results. The behavior looks like diligence. It is structured to prevent the kind of examination that would actually produce change. The effort trap is a personal defensive routine. The constant motion is not just addiction or virtue signaling or bad strategy. It is protection from the silence in which the real questions would have to be asked. The technique at the end of this chapter is simple but not easy, and it is the foundation everything else in this book builds on. For 1 week, keep a small notebook or a note on your phone, and every time you catch yourself backing away from something that matters, every time you undercharge, over-explain, choose busy work over important work, avoid a difficult conversation that would open a door, or manufacture a reason not to follow through, write 1 sentence. Not a judgment, not an explanation, just an observation. What was I about to do, and what did I do instead? After 7 days, read those observations together. The pattern you see is not a list of mistakes. It is a map, and having the map is the beginning of everything that comes next. Chapter 2. Your Childhood Money Education. Before you could read, before you could reason about anything, before you had a single conscious opinion about the economy or your own worth, you already had a money education. You probably did not know it was happening. No one set you down with a curriculum. There were no worksheets or lesson plans. But between the ages of 0 and 7, your brain was operating in a state of near-constant neurological absorption, a developmental phase that researchers in developmental psychology describe as theta dominant, meaning your brain was functioning in a state functionally similar to hypnosis in terms of how readily it accepted new information as foundational truth. You were not evaluating what you were learning. You were not forming opinions about it or testing it against alternatives. You were simply installing it. And what were you installing? Every conversation your parents had about money within earshot. Every time a bill arrived and the air in the room changed. Every time an expensive item was dismissed with "we can't afford that" versus "that's not how we choose to spend." Every facial expression that accompanied a financial setback. Every argument that had money somewhere in its DNA. Every story about a successful or unsuccessful person that was told with admiration, envy, contempt, or warning. You absorbed all of it. And your brain did exactly what developing brains are supposed to do. It built a working model of how money works, who gets it, what it costs to have it, and what it means about a person who does or does not. The research of Brad Klontz, a financial psychologist whose work changed how clinicians understand the relationship between psychology and financial behavior, identifies 4 primary money scripts that people carry from childhood into adulthood. The first is money avoidance, the belief that money is inherently corrupting, that wealthy people are greedy or dishonest, that there is something virtuous about not wanting too much. The second is money worship, the belief that money is the solution to every problem, that you never really have enough, that the next level of income will finally produce the satisfaction the current level failed to deliver. The third is money status, the belief that your net worth reflects your worth as a person, that financial achievement is the primary measure of success, that others are judging you constantly through the lens of your financial position. The fourth is money vigilance, the belief that financial information should be kept private, that spending is inherently dangerous, that security comes from hoarding rather than deploying resources. None of these scripts are wrong in absolute terms. Most of them contain a kernel of lived truth that made sense in the specific context where they were learned. The child of a parent who suffered because of financial recklessness was not wrong to learn caution. The child of a family that genuinely struggled was not wrong to learn that money matters enormously. The child who watched a successful relative be treated with contempt by struggling relatives was not wrong to absorb something complicated about what wealth does to belonging. The learning was appropriate. The problem is not the learning. The problem is that the learning does not stay in its original context. It travels with you into situations that are completely different, and it applies the old logic to new circumstances, and the new circumstances suffer for it. James is 41, a project manager at a mid-sized technology company, and despite earning more now than his father did at the peak of his career, he has never been able to hold on to money for very long. Every time his income rises, his expenses find a way to match it. His retirement account is thin for his age. He has tried budgeting 4 times. He has tried financial advisors. The math, on paper, is not complicated. He earns enough to save meaningfully, but something always intervenes. A spontaneous purchase he cannot quite explain in retrospect. A decision to help a family member financially in a way that sets his own plans back by months. A subtle, consistent discomfort with the idea of having significantly more than the people he grew up with. When James began working with a therapist who specialized in money psychology, he recalled something specific and seemingly small from his childhood. His father used to say, with genuine feeling and not a hint of bitterness that he could detect at the time, that rich people were either lucky or crooked, one or the other. Honest people worked for what they had, and that was enough, and there was dignity in that. James consciously disagrees with this. He wants to build wealth. He has a financial plan. He believes in investing. But underneath all of that, in the part of his brain that processes identity and belonging, there is a conflict running quietly. Accumulating significant wealth would make him, in the framework he absorbed before he was old enough to evaluate it, either lucky or crooked. It would make him different from his father, from the people he grew up with, from the community of honest working people whose dignity he genuinely honors. And the brain, which prioritizes belonging and identity coherence above almost everything else, found a way to prevent that separation. It spent the money before it could accumulate into a threat to where James belongs. The research on intergenerational wealth psychology is particularly striking in this regard. Studies examining the financial behaviors of adult children and grandchildren of Depression-era Americans found that specific scarcity behaviors persisted into the 3rd generation. People who had never experienced material scarcity in their own lives were exhibiting the financial behaviors of people who had survived genuine deprivation. The wiring outlived the conditions that created it by 50 years and 2 generations. In many families, money is not discussed badly. It is not discussed at all. The silence around money, which is at least as common as the dysfunctional conversations, carries its own specific curriculum. It teaches that money is a private matter, perhaps shameful, certainly not something to be examined openly or discussed with curiosity. It teaches that financial intelligence is not something ordinary people develop. It teaches that money works the way it works, that your relationship with it is largely fixed, and that the appropriate response to financial limitation is endurance rather than understanding. If you grew up in a home where money was simply never talked about, where the arrival of bills caused a tightening in the household atmosphere that was never explained and never resolved in your presence, you may have arrived at adulthood with almost no operational framework for how money actually works. Not the math, necessarily, but the relationship to it, the psychology, the beliefs about what is possible and who it is possible for. That absence is also an installation, and it typically runs as a combination of anxious avoidance of financial information and a persistent sense that other people understand something about money that you were never quite given access to. Your money narrative is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. That distinction is worth sitting with. You did not choose the beliefs that were installed in you before you had the cognitive tools to evaluate them. But you are not a child now, and the beliefs are still running, and the results they produce are real and consequential, and yours to address. The technique for this chapter is a money script inventory. Finish these sentences as many times as you can, as fast as you can, without editing yourself. Money is blank. Rich people are blank. I would have more money if blank. Money makes people blank. In my family, money was blank. Write these completions quickly, because the quick version is the honest version. What surfaces before the editing is what you actually believe at the level where your decisions are made. Chapter 3. The Addiction to Effort. Here is something that almost no voice in the productivity and self-improvement space will say out loud, because saying it out loud undermines a significant portion of the industry's business model. Effort can be an addiction, not metaphorically, not as a loose way of describing enthusiasm for work, but neurologically, behaviorally, and in measurable clinical terms. The compulsive need to work hard is a real phenomenon with real patterns, real triggers, and a real physiological mechanism driving it. When you work hard, your brain releases dopamine. When you complete a task, clear a backlog, respond to an urgent email, cross something off a list, you get a small but genuine neurochemical reward. This is not a character flaw. This is how the brain's reward circuitry was designed to function. Effort produces outcomes. Outcomes produce survival advantages, so the brain rewards effort. The problem begins when the reward becomes decoupled from the outcome and starts attaching to the activity itself. When the completion of tasks, rather than the consequences of completing them, becomes the primary driver of behavior. Researchers studying workaholism have identified a pattern they call effort dissociation. The person becomes addicted to the feeling of working rather than to the results that working is supposed to produce. The two things, which in a healthy system are tightly linked, come apart. And once that dissociation takes hold, outcomes become almost secondary to the compulsion. The person needs to feel busy the way that someone else needs a drink. The busyness is managing something. It is suppressing something. Usually it is anxiety. Often it is an older, quieter discomfort that only makes itself known in stillness. Think about your relationship with stillness, not sleep. Think about deliberate, unstructured stillness. Time when you are not doing anything, not planning, not optimizing, not listening to an educational podcast, not checking your phone because the checking itself has become a kind of work. How long can you sit with genuine emptiness before something begins to pull you toward your inbox, your to-do list, your next optimization? For most people in the demographic most likely to be listening to this audiobook right now, the answer is not very long at all. That pull is information. It is telling you that stillness activates something uncomfortable enough that your nervous system would rather manufacture urgency than encounter it. And what is that discomfort? It varies by person, but the most common versions are some expression of one of these two things. Either, I am afraid that if I stop, I will have to face exactly how far I am from where I want to be, and the distance will be unbearable. Or, I am afraid that without constant visible effort, I am not actually worth anything, and someone will notice. This is the connection between effort addiction and identity that productivity culture refuses to examine, because the examination destroys the product. If your value as a human being is not located in your output, if rest is not a reward you earn through exhaustion, but a right you have by virtue of being alive, if busyness is not a moral position, but simply a way of organizing time, then the entire economy of hustle content loses its grip on you. And so the discomfort stays unnamed. The addiction stays functional. And the person keeps producing, keeps optimizing, keeps pushing, while the treadmill keeps spinning. Elena is a graphic designer who has been freelancing for 6 years. By most external measures, she is successful. She is fully booked months in advance. Her clients adore her and refer her constantly. Her work has won recognition, but she has not raised her rates in 4 years despite her calendar being perpetually full, which is one of the clearest market signals possible that she is underpriced. She works 7 days most weeks. She has turned down 2 partnership conversations that would have meaningfully increased both her income and her creative freedom. She is exhausted in a structural, bone-deep way that occasional vacations do not touch. When a business coach asked Elena to spend one Saturday doing nothing, no work, no planning, no podcast, just existing without an agenda. She lasted approximately 40 minutes before a wave of anxiety, so physical she described it as pressure in her chest compelled her to open her laptop. Not guilt about a specific unfinished project, just raw, undifferentiated dread that seemed to have no object other than the absence of work itself. What Elena was experiencing is the withdrawal state of effort addiction. The discomfort is not caused by the absence of work. It is caused by the presence of the thing the work has been suppressing. And until she is willing to sit with that thing, to name it and examine it rather than outrun it, no amount of productivity optimization is going to change the fundamental equation of her professional life. The effort addict does not need better systems. They need to understand what the systems are protecting them from. Until that question gets answered honestly, every productivity intervention becomes another tool for the addiction, another way to stay busy, to stay useful, to stay safe inside the familiar loop of effort that never quite resolves into the rest it was supposed to earn. There is a clinical parallel worth drawing here, even though it may feel uncomfortable. In the treatment of substance addiction, one of the most well-established findings is that the substance is almost never the primary problem. It is a solution to a problem, usually an emotional one, usually present long before the substance appeared. The substance is the coping strategy, not the disease. The same framework applies to effort addiction. The overwork is the solution. What is the problem it is solving? Answering that question honestly is more valuable than any time management system, any morning routine optimization, any structure designed to make the work more efficient. You cannot solve your way out of an addiction to solving. The research on recovery from behavioral addiction points consistently to the same first step: tolerance of discomfort without the coping behavior. Not elimination of the behavior immediately, not white-knuckling through the craving, but a practiced, incremental expansion of the window in which the discomfort is present and the habitual response is not, long enough for the underlying signal to become audible. That window is where the real information lies. That window is where the actual work of this book happens. The technique for this chapter is a 30-minute technology-free sit. Set a timer. Sit comfortably somewhere without a screen in view. Do not meditate in a structured way. Just sit. Allow whatever arises to arise. Your only job is to notice. Notice where your mind goes when you give it nowhere specific to be. Notice what feelings surface in the body. Notice what thoughts repeat. Notice the moment the discomfort arrives and what shape it takes. After the 30 minutes, write down what happened. The thoughts and feelings that surfaced, especially the uncomfortable ones, are not problems to solve. They are the beliefs underneath the behavior, finally visible because you stopped running fast enough for them to catch you. Chapter 4. The Invisible Architecture of Self-Sabotage. You are almost certainly more self-aware than most people. The fact that you sought out something like this, that you are willing to ask the kind of uncomfortable questions it takes to end up here, indicates a level of genuine introspection that is genuinely uncommon. And so the suggestion that you might be unconsciously undermining yourself might feel slightly patronizing. You would know if you were doing that. You would have noticed. Here is the uncomfortable precision of the problem. The most sophisticated self-sabotage is invisible precisely because it does not present as sabotage. It presents as prudence, as realism, as taking care of other people, as timing, as making sure you are ready before you take the leap, which sounds responsible right up until you realize you have been getting ready for 3 years and the leap keeps getting pushed back. Psychologists who study self-defeating behavior have cataloged a remarkably consistent set of patterns that appear across different people, different industries, different income levels, and different life circumstances. The specific expression varies. The underlying mechanics are almost identical. Understanding yours, specifically and precisely yours, is what this chapter is about, because a general intervention on a vague problem produces vague results. The first pattern is called behavioral avoidance, and it is the most immediately recognizable once you know what you are looking at. It looks like procrastination, but it is more specific and more telling than that. It is selective procrastination. The tasks that get avoided are almost always the ones with the highest stakes and the highest potential for meaningful change. The outreach email to the person who could genuinely help you. The conversation about raising your rates. The business plan that would require you to make real commitments to real goals. The investment decision that would require you to believe your financial future is worth investing in. The lower stakes tasks get done immediately and thoroughly. The inbox gets cleared, the presentation gets polished, the routine meeting gets prepared for with surprising diligence. The brain is doing threat management. High-stakes tasks carry a higher probability of failure, rejection, and exposure, and so they get quietly displaced behind a satisfying layer of productivity theater. The second pattern is self-handicapping, and this one requires more honesty to see in yourself because it is well disguised as reasonable behavior. Self-handicapping is when you unconsciously create conditions that pre-explain potential failure, taking on too many projects simultaneously, so that if any of them underperforms, you can credibly attribute it to bandwidth rather than ability. Waiting until the absolute last possible moment to begin something important, so that the outcome reflects time pressure rather than your actual ceiling. Keeping your goals deliberately vague so that there is no clear way to measure whether you have met them. Staying busy enough that the real work never quite gets done. These are not conscious strategies. They are protective mechanisms that preserve the self-image at the cost of the actual performance the self-image is supposedly meant to support. The third pattern is what researchers sometimes call proximity collapse, and it is the most disorienting of the three because it strikes exactly when things are going well. Proximity collapse is self-sabotage that occurs at the precise moment you are closest to a meaningful breakthrough. The new client who would double your revenue, and you somehow miss the follow-up. The professional relationship that is developing into something genuinely valuable, and you create an unnecessary conflict. The savings goal you have finally almost reached, and an impulse purchase sets you back. The closer you get to the edge of your psychological comfort zone, the more actively your nervous system works to pull you back inside it. This is not weakness. This is the predictive brain doing exactly what it was built to do. Preserve the familiar, because the familiar is what has kept you safe. Before we meet the person whose story illustrates this pattern most clearly, it is worth sitting with the particular cruelty of proximity collapse for a moment. Behavioral avoidance and self-handicapping, painful as they are, at least have the courtesy to keep you away from the thing you want. Proximity collapse waits until you are close enough to smell it. It lets you do all the work, build all the momentum, close most of the distance, and then activates when the goal is near enough to be real. The timing is not random. The nervous system has a threshold, a distance from the familiar that triggers the alarm, and that threshold is calibrated precisely to the size of the leap required. Small goals rarely trigger proximity collapse. Genuinely transformative ones almost always do. This is why people who have already overcome significant obstacles are sometimes the most vulnerable to this particular pattern. They have proven they can handle difficulty. They have built real capability. And then they hit the threshold of a change that would make them genuinely, categorically different from the person they have always been, and the system that kept them safe through all of it activates at exactly the wrong moment. The bigger the potential leap, the more fiercely the nervous system works to prevent it. Not because the leap is dangerous, because it is unknown. And unknown, to the oldest parts of the human brain, is the same thing as dangerous. Marcus has been a freelance software developer for 8 years. He is genuinely excellent at his craft. He has long-term clients who trust him completely and have expanded their work with him. And he has been earning roughly the same annual income for the past 5 years, during a period when the market for his specific skills has grown dramatically. He does not pursue new clients proactively. When inbound interest arrives from larger companies that would pay significantly more, he finds himself identifying problems with the project scope until the conversation loses momentum. He describes this as being selective, which sounds healthy. But selectivity does not explain why the projects he redirects away from are precisely the ones requiring him to operate at a higher level of visibility and responsibility. Marcus grew up watching his father work himself to the edge of his capacity and still fail to provide the stability the family needed. Success in Marcus's emotional vocabulary is associated with overextension, with giving more than you have, with a kind of collapse waiting just around the corner of real achievement. Staying moderate is staying safe, and his brilliant, well-defended brain has constructed a narrative around selectivity and work-life balance that keeps him exactly where his nervous system decided, a long time ago, was the safest place to be. It is worth noting here that the self-sabotage patterns do not operate in isolation. Most people carry more than one. The behavioral avoidance provides the primary defense. The self-handicapping provides the backup explanation when the avoidance is noticed. The proximity collapse handles anything that slips past the first two lines. Together, they form a comprehensive architecture, and it is genuinely admirable in its completeness, even as it is costing you everything you say you want. The audit for this chapter asks one direct question for every significant professional or financial stall in your life over the past 3 years. Not what went wrong externally. What did you do? And at what moment? And what were you feeling in your body in that specific moment? You are looking for the sensation that immediately preceded the decision. The constriction, the quickening, the vague urgency, the sudden need to reconsider. That sensation is the signal. Find the consistent signature of that sensation across multiple events, and you have found the specific architecture of your personal self-sabotage. Chapter 5. The Scarcity Tax. There is a concept from behavioral economics that does not get nearly the attention it deserves outside academic and research circles, and it is directly responsible for more financial stagnation among intelligent, high-effort people than almost any other single factor. It is called scarcity mindset, and while the term has been diluted through overuse in popular personal development content, the original research behind it is genuinely stunning. Sendhil Mullainathan at Harvard and Eldar Shaffer at Princeton spent years studying how scarcity affects cognition and decision-making. Their findings demonstrated something that challenges almost everything productivity culture and financial advice assumes. When people experience scarcity, whether financial, time-based, or social, the condition itself captures cognitive bandwidth. It is not simply that people with scarce resources sometimes make worse decisions. The mental occupation of managing scarcity literally reduces the cognitive capacity available for everything else. The brain under scarcity conditions functions measurably differently and measurably worse on tasks requiring planning, impulse control, long-term thinking, and the kind of abstract reasoning that good financial decision-making depends on. The experience of not having enough makes you, in a directly measurable sense, less cognitively capable of acquiring enough. This is not a character flaw. This is a cognitive tax. And the particularly cruel element of the findings is that the tax is levied not only on people experiencing genuine material scarcity, but on anyone whose mental model of their situation generates the psychological experience of scarcity. A person with objectively sufficient resources, who holds a belief that those resources are insufficient or precarious, will experience the same cognitive degradation as someone in genuine material shortage. The belief creates the tax, independent of the underlying reality. This is why scarcity mindset is so durable and so difficult to exit without deliberate intervention. It is self-reinforcing. The belief that resources are scarce impairs the cognitive functions most necessary for improving your situation, which produces outcomes that seem to confirm the belief, which tightens the psychological experience of scarcity, which further impairs cognition. Around and around, quietly and persistently, while the person works harder and harder to compensate for a degradation in performance they cannot quite identify or explain. Think carefully about what actually happens in your mind when you check your bank balance. Not the story you would tell someone about your relationship with money. The actual sensation. Is there a constriction? A bracing? A quick scan for the worst-case number? That physiological response, if it is present, is not simply discomfort. It is the onset of the cognitive tax. And in the minutes and hours that follow, are your financial thoughts and decisions typically clearer and more strategic, or more reactive and avoidant? For most people with a scarcity-patterned financial identity, the answer is more reactive. The information triggered the scarcity response, which narrowed attention and increased impulsivity, which produced exactly the kind of short-term reactive decision-making that perpetuates the cycle. There is a practical dimension of the scarcity tax worth examining specifically because it shows up in a recognizable and costly way for most of the people this book is written for. It shows up in how you think about pricing. For most professionals, freelancers, and business owners with a scarcity-patterned financial identity, the question of what to charge activates the scarcity experience almost without exception. And once activated, the scarcity cognitive tax does exactly what the research predicts. It narrows attention toward the short term, away from the long term. It increases loss aversion, making the potential loss of a client who balks at your rate feel larger than the ongoing cost of undercharging every client you have. It makes the conservative choice feel like the rational choice, when financially, it is almost always the most expensive choice available. The person running a scarcity-taxed pricing decision is not making a strategic calculation about market rates and value delivery. They are making a threat response calculation about what is safe, what will not be rejected, what will not result in the loss of something they cannot afford to lose. And the number they arrive at reflects the threat calculation, not the value calculation. The shift this chapter is pointing toward is not the pop psychology version of abundance mindset. The research does not support telling yourself positive things and hoping the feeling follows. What is supported is a specific cognitive reframe. The reframe is not "I have plenty" when you may not. The reframe is "I am capable of solving this," as opposed to "this situation defines my capacity." Scarcity thinking frames every financial challenge as evidence of a permanent condition. Abundance thinking in the research-supported version frames every financial challenge as a solvable problem, one that exists outside your identity rather than being constitutive of it. The practical technique for this chapter is psychological distancing. When you notice the scarcity trigger activating, before you react, pause and ask a different question than the one the scarcity response is generating. Instead of "How do I fix this right now?" ask, "What would the most financially calm version of me notice about this situation that I am not currently seeing?" The psychological distance created by that shift is the space between stimulus and response where actual strategic thinking can occur. That space is where your real financial intelligence lies, and the scarcity response, when you let it run unchecked, is precisely what collapses it. Practice this distancing not only in crisis moments, but in routine financial interactions. The invoice you are about to send, the rate conversation you are about to enter, the budget review you have been avoiding. Each of these is a scarcity trigger waiting to activate the cognitive tax. Approaching each one with 2 seconds of deliberate distancing before engaging changes the neurological context of the decision that follows. 2 seconds is not a dramatic intervention, but consistently applied over a year of daily financial choices. It is the difference between decisions made from the threat response and decisions made from the strategic mind. That difference, compounded, is exactly the gap between the results you have been getting and the results you want. One final note on the scarcity tax before we move forward. The relief from it is not permanent, and it is not linear. You will have days, even weeks, when the scarcity response reasserts itself with full force and the cognitive tax feels as heavy as it ever did. This is not regression. It is the normal oscillation of a nervous system in transition. What changes over time is not the complete absence of the trigger. What changes is the speed of recovery, the ability to recognize what is happening while it is happening, and the existence of a practiced alternative response ready to deploy when the old one activates. The goal is not to never feel scarcity. The goal is to stop letting the feeling of scarcity make the decision. Chapter 6: Identity Before Income. Among all the mechanisms in this book, this one requires the most patience to understand and produces, once understood, the most immediate and durable shift in how you approach financial and professional growth. It is the concept that identity must precede income, not follow it. And it explains why income growth, even when it happens, so reliably fails to stick for people whose inner model of themselves has not caught up to their outer circumstances. Standard financial advice operates on an implicit model that goes like this: you work hard, you earn more, you save and invest, your net worth grows, and over time your identity naturally updates to reflect your new reality. The advice assumes that identity follows outcome. Produce the result first, and the self-concept will adjust to match. This sounds logical. It is, in practice, almost completely backwards. Research on the durability of financial behavior change consistently finds that lasting improvement requires an identity shift that precedes the behavioral change, not one that follows from it. This is not mysticism or manifestation language. It is a description of how the brain's predictive machinery works in practice. Your brain is not a passive observer of your behavior, drawing neutral conclusions about who you are from the evidence it collects. It is an active model builder that constantly constructs and defends a coherent story of who you are, because that story is what it uses to generate predictions about the future and make decisions in the present. The psychologist Carol Dweck's work on growth versus fixed mindset is part of this story, but the deeper mechanism is what neuroscientists call the default mode network, the brain system responsible for maintaining your sense of continuous identity across time. This network is extraordinarily conservative. Its job is coherence, not accuracy. It resists information that contradicts the established self-model, and it actively reconstructs experiences to fit the existing narrative, even when that reconstruction requires some creative editing of what actually happened. What this means in practice is that if your self-model is someone who struggles financially, your brain will process your financial experiences through that model. A windfall becomes temporary good luck that should be spent before it disappears. A period of income growth becomes a setup for an inevitable correction. A new income level feels borrowed, like someone else's life you are trying on without quite deserving it. The imposter syndrome that so many high-achieving people describe is not low self-esteem. It is the default mode network doing its job, flagging the discrepancy between the current experience and the established self-model, and generating the sensation of fraudulence as a signal that something is out of alignment. And eventually, reliably, the system restores alignment. Lottery winners return to their pre-lottery financial baseline within a few years, not because they are foolish, but because their financial identity never shifted to match their new reality. Pay raises fail to produce lasting financial improvement for people with a scarcity identity because the money arrives in a context where the identity that would manage it wisely is still absent. You can adopt all the right financial habits and still feel like a fraud because the habits exist in tension with the identity rather than emerging naturally from it. The identity must shift first, not to some idealized future version of yourself that feels comically remote from where you stand today, but by one meaningful step. The mechanism the research supports for generating that shift is called identity reinforcement through microevidence. The brain does not accept declarations. It accepts evidence, but the evidence does not need to be large. It needs to be consistent, and it needs to be consciously interpreted as identity evidence in the moment it occurs. This means identifying the smallest possible behavior that a person with your target financial identity would routinely engage in. Not a grand gesture, a small, real, repeatable action. Making a specific investment decision rather than leaving the money in a low-yield account out of habit. Having a direct, clear conversation about price rather than discounting preemptively. Declining a financially depleting commitment rather than saying yes out of guilt. Doing any one of these things, and then consciously noting, that is what a person who manages money well does, and I just did it. The identity accumulates from these moments. Not dramatically, gradually, through consistent repetition and conscious narration. The income follows the identity because the identity changes the decisions, and the decisions, compounded over time, change the outcomes. The sequence runs in that direction. Building the result and hoping the identity follows is the approach that produces the treadmill. There is a question that comes up reliably at this point in the conversation, and it is worth addressing directly. The question is, does this mean I am supposed to fake it until I make it? The answer is no, and the distinction is important. Faking it is performing a version of yourself you do not believe in for the benefit of an external audience. Identity building is doing the smallest, genuine actions of the person you are becoming, not for an audience, but as real evidence for your own nervous system. The audience is internal. The performance is a private communication between your current self-model and the one you are constructing. Nobody else needs to see it. The brain only needs to register it. The other question that comes up is about patience. How long does this take? The honest answer is that it varies widely by the depth of the original belief, the consistency of the practice, and the degree to which the new identity is being reinforced or undermined by the social environment covered in a later chapter. What the research does say clearly is that identity change that precedes behavioral results is real and measurable in most people within 60 to 90 days of consistent practice. Not complete, but real. Enough that the decisions begin to feel different, the old behavior feels less inevitable, and the new pattern begins to have its own gravitational pull. Your technique for this chapter is an identity audit in 2 parts. Write 1 paragraph describing your current financial identity as honestly and specifically as you can, based not on your aspirations, but on the story your actual behavior tells right now. Then write a 2nd paragraph describing the financial identity you are building in specific behavioral terms. What does that person decide? How do they price their work? How do they respond to financial information? What do they do with surplus? Then identify 1 behavior, 1 small and completely executable action that belongs to the 2nd paragraph and not the 1st. Do that action this week. Label it, in your own mind, as identity evidence. That labeling is not self-congratulation. It is the actual mechanism of change. Chapter 7. How beliefs defend themselves. Every belief system your brain has installed, no matter how outdated or counterproductive, comes equipped with a defense mechanism. This is not a metaphor. It is a description of an actual neurological function. When a belief is sufficiently embedded in your self-model and your emotional memory, your brain will generate genuine cognitive discomfort in response to information that threatens it. This discomfort is engineered to make you dismiss the threatening information, find logical arguments against it, or simply avoid it entirely. The older and deeper the belief, the more sophisticated and persuasive the defense will be. In the context of limiting financial beliefs, this creates a particular problem. The moments when you most need new information are precisely the moments your brain will work hardest to prevent that information from landing. The person who most needs to hear that their worth is not located in their productivity is the person whose identity is most thoroughly organized around output. The person who most needs to believe that financial success is available to them is the person whose family history made that idea feel most transgressive. The defenses are not placed randomly. They are placed exactly where they would be most disruptive if they fell. This is why insight alone is not enough. You have almost certainly had insights before, probably many of them. Moments of clarity where something crystallized and you thought, yes, that is exactly the pattern, I see it completely. And then, a few days or weeks later, the insight faded. The behavior reasserted itself. Life got busy and the old grooves felt inevitable again. The insight was real. The change did not stick, because insight lives in the conscious mind, and the beliefs live somewhere older and more defended than conscious thought can reliably reach. Cognitive rewiring is the process of making new neural connections durable enough to resist the default mode network's ongoing preference for the existing architecture. The term comes directly from neuroscience research on neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong and well-documented capacity to form new neural pathways and reorganize existing ones. But the practical application has been developed most rigorously in clinical psychology, specifically in cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and their more recent integrations. The mechanism that makes rewiring durable is repetition under emotional engagement. New neural pathways are not established by being told something once, or by understanding something intellectually, or even by genuinely agreeing with a new perspective. They are established by returning to the same reframe repeatedly, across varied contexts, while the emotional system is activated. This is the crucial piece that purely intellectual approaches miss. The limiting beliefs do not live in the prefrontal cortex where logical analysis happens. They live in the amygdala, in the emotional memory structures in the body. New beliefs must be established in that same territory under similar emotional conditions before they have any chance of influencing the behavior that the old beliefs are directing. What this looks like in practice is not pleasant and not particularly quick, but it is specific and teachable. When the limiting belief activates, when you feel the familiar pull toward undercharging, toward avoidance, toward the specific version of self-sabotage that is yours, the intervention is not to suppress the feeling or argue with the belief or replace it with an affirmation. The intervention is to stay with the emotional activation while deliberately holding an alternative interpretation in awareness at the same time. You are expanding the field of what is possible in that moment, not eliminating the old belief, but refusing to let it be the only voice in the room. This is uncomfortable. It is meant to be. The discomfort is the sensation of two competing neural patterns existing simultaneously, and the prefrontal cortex being asked to hold space for both rather than defaulting to the established one. Over time, and with repetition, the alternative interpretation begins to carry its own emotional weight, its own felt sense of truth, and the old belief loses its monopoly on that emotional territory. The distinction between an affirmation and a genuine reframe is worth making precisely here. An affirmation is a statement you want to be true, delivered with the hope that repetition will produce belief. A reframe is a statement that is already true, but that the limiting belief has been preventing you from weighing appropriately. The brain accepts evidence. It does not accept declarations. This is why affirmations feel hollow to skeptical, evidence-oriented people, and why the reframe approach, grounded in real and specific personal evidence, works when affirmations do not. The prerequisite for the 30-day protocol that follows in the next chapter is this. You need to have identified your specific primary limiting belief with enough precision to state it in a single clear sentence. Not a general sense of having self-doubt. A specific, nameable belief you can locate in your actual history and point to in your actual current behavior. There is one more element worth naming before you write that sentence, because it affects how people interpret what they find. When you identify your core limiting belief, your first instinct may be to argue with it, to marshal evidence against it, to remind yourself of all the reasons it is not technically accurate. Resist that instinct, at least initially. The belief does not need to be logically defensible to be operationally powerful. Your nervous system is not running a logic program. It is running a prediction program, and what it predicts determines how it prepares you to act. The belief that you are not the kind of person who has money does not need to be true to be influential. It only needs to be encoded in the emotional memory structures that your brain consults when it constructs expectations about the future. This is also why arguing with limiting beliefs in the moment they activate tends to be ineffective. You cannot out-argue your own amygdala. The logical counterargument arrives too late, via a pathway that is too slow, to interrupt a response that was generated in milliseconds by a system that does not process language. What does work, as the next chapter will detail, is a different kind of engagement entirely. One that meets the emotional response on its own terms rather than trying to reason it out of existence. Write one sentence. My primary limiting belief about money and success is blank. Finish it honestly and specifically. Say it out loud. Notice what your body does when you do. That response is the defense mechanism activating because you found the real one. Chapter 8. The social field. There is a distinction that separates people who make lasting financial and professional transformation from people who make repeated short-term changes that collapse back to baseline. The distinction is not willpower, because willpower has been shown repeatedly to be an inexhaustible resource that cannot sustain behavioral change over time. It is not intelligence. It is not even the quality of the strategies being used. The distinction is community, and more specifically, the relationship between your evolving belief system and the social environment in which it has to survive. Human beings are tribal in a deep, pre-rational, neurologically primary sense. Before planning, before reasoning, before financial decision-making of any kind, the brain's most fundamental operational concern is social survival. Belonging to the group is not a preference. It is a survival parameter. The group's norms, values, and collective beliefs are not simply interesting data points. They are standards the brain uses to calibrate what is safe, what is permitted, and who you are allowed to be. Deviation from them activates the same threat response systems as physical danger, because for most of human evolutionary history, exclusion from the group was genuinely life-threatening. This means that when you begin to genuinely change your beliefs about money, about your own worth, about what you are allowed to have and be, you will eventually bump into the people in your life for whom your old beliefs were functional. The family member for whom your financial struggle was a point of connection. The peer group for whom shared complaints about money are a bonding ritual. The professional community for whom a certain level of underperformance is the norm and genuine ambition feels like an implicit criticism. The social field does not want to lose you, and it will exert gravity, often without any individual in it consciously intending to do so. These people are not your enemies. They are operating the same machinery you have been learning about throughout this book, and they have not yet had occasion to examine it. But their presence in your life creates a field of influence that operates below the level of explicit pressure. Nobody needs to say anything directly discouraging. The ambient message of the social environment, communicated through humor, through what gets celebrated versus ignored, through who is seen as trustworthy versus pretentious, does the work quietly and continuously. The research on social networks and behavior change makes the mechanism visible in an illuminating way. Studies by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler documented that behaviors as personal as smoking, happiness, and financial generosity spread through social networks up to 3 degrees of separation. Not just from the people you know directly, but from their connections, and from those connections. The social field you inhabit is both more powerful and more extensive than it typically appears. This finding has a specific and practical implication for anyone trying to change their financial behavior in a social context where those behaviors are not the norm. The effort required to sustain the new behavior is significantly higher when the social network is providing constant, low-level reinforcement of the old pattern. Not through hostility, not through explicit criticism, through the simple ambient signal of what is considered normal in the spaces you regularly occupy. The brain is enormously sensitive to social normality signals. It was built to track what everyone else is doing, because in the evolutionary context where these systems were developed, doing what everyone else was doing was almost always the safest available option. Understanding this does not require cynicism about your relationships. It requires honesty about the math. If you are trying to run in a direction while a strong current is running against you, you are not going to succeed by trying harder. You are going to succeed by understanding the current, accounting for it in your plan, and either finding ways to move partially with it or developing the specific strength required to move against it deliberately and sustainably. None of this means you need to leave your friends or engineer distance from your family. It means you need to understand the field you are moving through, so that you are navigating it consciously rather than being moved by it without knowing it. Seeing the field clearly does not make it less real, but it makes its influence optional in a way that invisibility never allows. What the research on durable behavior change consistently suggests is that strategic exposure is a necessary complement to the internal cognitive work. It is not sufficient to change what you think if you remain exclusively surrounded by inputs that reinforce the old thinking. New neural reference points require exposure to new models, and those models need to be concrete enough for the brain to do something with them. Not aspirational fantasies, not abstract wealth imagery, but real examples of the financial identity you are building, real evidence that it exists and is accessible and does not require you to become someone unrecognizable. The most sustainable version of this is relationship-based. Finding even 1 or 2 people who are navigating the same kind of internal work, who hold similar ambitions and are willing to be honest about the obstacles, provides a counter-gravity to the ambient social field that content consumption alone cannot replicate. You are not looking for cheerleaders. You are looking for witnesses. People who can see clearly enough to name what they observe, including when the old pattern is running. The technique for this chapter is a social field audit. List the 5 people you spend the most time with. For each, write down their dominant beliefs about money, wealth, and ambition, based not on what they say they believe on principle, but on what their behavior and emotional responses to your growth consistently suggest. Then ask whether this social field is supporting the identity you are building or working quietly against it. You may not need to take any action on what you find, but seeing clearly what you are navigating is itself a form of power. A note on what action, if any, might follow from this audit. The research does not suggest that you need to leave relationships in order to change your financial identity. Radical social surgery is rarely necessary and often counterproductive because the loss of belonging it creates activates exactly the threat response that undermines the change process. What the research does suggest is a combination of 2 things. First, consciously increasing your exposure to inputs that model the identity you are building, even if those inputs are not personal relationships. Books, communities, environments, conversations, even well-chosen content that expose your nervous system to concrete evidence that the financial identity you are building is real and inhabited by real people. Second, developing the practice of what some researchers call perspective taking with your existing relationships. The capacity to hear a limiting belief expressed by someone you love and consciously choose, in that moment, not to absorb it as truth. You can love the person and decline the installation. That is not disloyalty. It is the cognitive independence that genuine change requires. Chapter 9. The 30-Day Cognitive Rewiring Protocol. Everything in this book has been building toward a structure you can actually use. Not a concept to carry around, not an insight to feel good about for a few days, but a concrete protocol that works with the actual mechanisms of belief change rather than around them. The 30-Day Cognitive Rewiring Protocol is organized in 3 phases of 10 days each. It is built on the neuroscience of habit formation, on clinical research on durable belief change, and on the practical reality that you have a full life and cannot dedicate 4 hours a day to structured self-improvement. The daily practice requires between 10 and 20 minutes. The weekly reflection takes 30. That is the time commitment. The effectiveness is not in the volume of time invested. It is in the precision and the consistency. Phase 1 is called surfacing and naming. The work of the first 10 days is not change. It is not transformation. It is not any kind of improvement at all. It is simply clarity. Every morning of the first 10 days, you read the belief statement you wrote at the end of the previous chapter. Your primary broke thought pattern stated in a single specific sentence, out loud to yourself. Then you write for 5 minutes about where you noticed that belief operating in the previous 24 hours. Not analyzing it, not judging it, not trying to change it. Just observing and documenting. Where did it show up? How did it disguise itself? What decisions did it influence? What did it feel like in your body in the moment it activated? By day 10, you will have something that most people never have, a detailed, specific, evidence-rich map of exactly how your primary limiting belief expresses itself in your actual daily life. You will recognize it the moment it begins to activate, because you have been watching it carefully for 10 consecutive days. That recognition, that split-second gap between trigger and automatic response, is where the entire change process lives. Phase 2 is interruption and reframe. Now that you can see the belief operating in real time, the work shifts to interrupting it at the precise moment of activation and deliberately generating an alternative interpretation while the emotional response is still active. This is the piece that makes the rewiring neurologically effective rather than merely intellectually interesting. When the belief activates, when you feel the specific signature of your pattern beginning to run, you pause, name it out loud or in writing, and immediately generate a reframe. Not an affirmation. A specific, evidence-based alternative interpretation grounded in something real that is actually true about you and your situation. The distinction between an affirmation and a reframe matters enormously here. An affirmation is a statement you want to be true, delivered with the hope that repetition will produce belief. A reframe is a statement that is already true, but that the limiting belief has been preventing you from weighing appropriately. Something like, I noticed the belief that I am not someone who charges premium rates. The evidence that challenges that belief from this week includes this client who said my work changed their business, and this competitor whose output is objectively lower quality, but whose rates are 30% higher than mine, and this conversation in which a prospective client did not flinch at my quote. The evidence grounding is what makes it neurologically effective. The brain accepts evidence. It does not accept declarations. Phase 3 is identity anchoring. In the final 10 days of the protocol, the practice shifts from interrupting the old belief to actively building and reinforcing the new identity through deliberate daily action. Each morning, you identify one specific behavior that belongs to your target financial identity. One thing that person would do today that you have historically avoided or deferred, and you do that thing regardless of whether you feel ready for it or comfortable with it. Not a huge, life reorganizing action. Something small enough to be reliably executable and specific enough to generate genuine identity evidence. The sequence matters enormously. You are not waiting to feel like a different person before you act like one. You are acting like a different person in order to generate the feeling, which generates the evidence, which gradually updates the self-model. The direction of causation is behavior to identity, not identity to behavior. This is the reversal of the intuitive sequence, and it is the reversal that makes it work. Research following participants through similar 3-phase protocols shows a consistent pattern. Phase 1 is uncomfortable in a surprising way. Seeing the belief clearly and tracking it daily tends to produce a heightened awareness of how pervasively it has been operating, which can feel temporarily worse than the comfortable fog of not seeing it. Phase 2 is where most dropout occurs, because interrupting a deeply embedded emotional response is genuinely effortful and the brain resists. Phase 3, for the people who reach it with consistency, tends to produce the first genuine experiences of what researchers call cognitive ease, moments when the new interpretation feels more natural and more true than the old one, moments when the old pattern activates but does not automatically command the decision. One practical note on implementation. The 30-day protocol will not feel linear. Days 7 through 12 are typically the most difficult because the novelty of Phase 1 has worn off and the new pattern of Phase 2 has not yet established enough repetition to feel natural. This is the period when most people abandon the protocol, and it is worth knowing in advance so that when the difficulty arrives, you recognize it as the predictable shape of the process rather than evidence that the process is not working. The protocol is also not a one-time experience. Most people who find it effective go through some version of it multiple times, working on different beliefs or working more deeply on the same one as their capacity for this kind of attention grows. The 30 days are not the destination. They are the beginning of a way of relating to your own mind that becomes more fluent with practice. You will not be completely rewired in 30 days. That is not a promise this protocol makes. The promise is more specific and more durable. In 30 days of consistent practice, you will have established the neural foundation for a belief system that is no longer running exclusively on outdated software. You will have created evidence your brain cannot entirely ignore. You will have acted repeatedly and with intention as the person you are in the process of becoming. And the brain, which is built to update its predictive models when the evidence is sufficiently consistent and the behavior sufficiently persistent, will follow. Conclusion. Begin. You came to this audiobook with a question. You may have phrased it differently, but it was some version of the same thing. I am working hard. I am trying everything I know to try. Why is it not working? This book has offered an answer that is not comfortable, and it is worth acknowledging that directly before we close. It does not let you point at the economy, or your industry, or your timing, or the people who did not give you the opportunities you deserved, or any of the external forces that are genuinely real and genuinely influential in any fair accounting of your situation. It points inward. It points at something installed before you had any say in the matter, running without your awareness or consent, quietly directing decisions you thought were entirely your own. That is not where most people want the answer to be. Outside problems have outside solutions. Inside problems require something harder. The willingness to look honestly at the operating system of your own mind and decide that you are going to do something about what you find there. But here is what is also true, and it is perhaps the most important thing in the entire book. An outside problem is one you cannot fully control. An inside problem is one you absolutely can. The belief that wealth is for other people, the script that success means losing something essential about who you are, the identity that says your ceiling is wherever you currently stand. These are not permanent features of your neurology. They are learned patterns installed at a time when you had no choice about what you were learning. And learned patterns can be unlearned, updated, replaced with something that actually serves the life you are trying to build. The brain is plastic, not as a metaphor, not as an inspirational frame, but as a biological fact that the neuroscience of the past 30 years has demonstrated with remarkable consistency. The capacity for change does not peak in your 20s and gradually diminish. The adult brain retains the capacity to form new neural connections, to reorganize existing pathways, to update long-running predictive models when the evidence for change is sufficiently consistent. This applies directly and specifically to the beliefs that have been running your financial and professional life without your knowledge or permission. They can be changed, not easily, not instantly, not without the discomfort that comes with any genuine restructuring. But they can be changed. The 30-day protocol is concrete and it is ready. The exercises at the end of each chapter are specific and they build on each other. The science underneath all of it is solid and replicable. But none of it moves without a decision. And the decision is not to change your thoughts or rewire your brain or rebuild your financial identity, though all of those are consequences of it. The decision is simply to take the question seriously, not the question of how to make more money, because you have been asking that question for long enough. And if the question itself had the answer in it, you would have found it by now. The upstream question, the prior question, the one that has to be answered before the downstream question can be answered honestly. Who do I actually believe I am? And is that belief still serving me? And if it is not, am I willing to begin the work of changing it? You are not broken. You have never been broken. You are a capable, driven person who has been running outdated software on excellent hardware, and the upgrade has been available for longer than you knew. The only thing standing between you and the beginning is the decision to begin. One last thing. The work ahead will not always feel like progress. There will be stretches where the old beliefs feel as solid and immovable as ever, where the new patterns feel thin and unconvincing, where the gap between who you are and who you are becoming feels wider rather than narrower. This is not failure. This is what genuine change actually feels like from the inside, which is one of the reasons so many people mistake it for failure and stop. Real transformation does not feel triumphant in the middle. It feels uncertain and effortful, and occasionally humiliating and completely worthwhile. Every person who has made the shift from high effort, low result to genuinely different outcomes has passed through exactly that terrain. Not around it, through it. What you have now, that you did not have before you started listening, is a map of the terrain. You know what the patterns are called. You know where they come from. You know the mechanisms that sustain them and the mechanisms that dismantle them. You have a protocol. You have techniques. You have a language for experiences that used to feel nameless and therefore permanent. That is not nothing. That is almost everything. The rest is the work itself. So begin.